Welcome to another episode of Talks with Tech Leaders. Today I'm delighted to be joined by James. Thanks for making the trip down from Durham today, James.
Hi, Kasim.
Yeah. Would you mind just giving a bit of an intro to yourself?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for inviting me. Great to be here. So my name is James Miller. I am founder of Grape Software.
Great. And tell me a little bit about Grape and a bit more about your background, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I suppose start with myself first, my background. So I suppose I'm not really your typical software developer. I've always had an interest in tech, but my background is food, working in the industry, in hospitality. And I've always been really passionate and interested and enthusiastic about technology, from being a young kid. And then as I grew up to become more and more interested in kind of technology and software, fiddling with computers, learning how they work, breaking them and trying to put them back together and fix them. So I've always had this kind of dual interest in food and tech. So I worked in hospitality and food for about 12 years. And then I went off into teaching. So I worked for a local authority doing kind of FE, delivering training and teaching in kind of food, nutrition and cooking. My degree was food science nutrition, bachelor's. So I graduated in 2006. I actually started a consultancy business on the side around food, doing sort of labelling, consultancy, menus, allergens, that sort of thing. Initially, it was working with individuals around kind of diets and menus and slimming and nutrition. Quickly discovered that really wasn't going to work out when you start to compete with the likes of Weight Watchers and Slimming World. So then sort of pivoted into B2B and started off a more kind of consultancy services to businesses, which did all right. And then I started Grape Software in 2020, literally in the March before COVID hit and lockdown, which was interesting in our first few months. So Grape Software was really about digitizing food hygiene, food inspections. So if we just kind of think about that for a minute, if you were to open a food business or a restaurant or takeaway, legally you have to get a food inspection from your local authority, and then with that you get a food hygiene rating, those kind of green stickers, the 1 to 5 scores. Unbelievably, in 2025, today, that process is a manual, paper-based process, an in-person clipboard and pen exercise. So somebody from the local authority comes out, gives you an in-person score using paperwork, go away, type it all out. So it's quite sort of archaic, quite sort of an administrative burden. There's no kind of standardisation around the UK, so all kind of 400 local authorities are doing it differently. So at Grape Software, we're trying to digitise that process. So taking what is an in-person, paper-based process to digitise that and modernise that and make it streamlined and more efficient.
Yeah, great. No, it sounds really interesting. Where did the idea come from for Grape Software?
Yeah, so I guess it was a combination of a couple of things. I mean, obviously, passion for food, an interest and curiosity in tech, I guess, was the kind of bedrock of that. But I was actually consulting with a university in the Northeast back in 2014, working on quite a large project. And at the end of that project, we realised a lot of the systems that they used within that university didn't really talk to each other, didn't really do what they needed to do. They were all working in isolation. And the catering manager said to me, there's an opportunity here to create something, to digitise this. At the time, it was around kind of menus and allergens and ingredients. And I kind of went away and explored that and thought about it for about 5 or 6 months and realised there was a few things out there doing elements of that. And it was quite tricky pulling in data from the supply chain. So I decided not to pursue that after kind of researching it and thinking about it and exploring it. And realised there was a bigger opportunity around food hygiene inspections specifically, because of the challenges and the processes in local authorities, the way it's a paper-based process. There wasn't any direct competitors. Local authorities tend to use sort of quite archaic ERP systems, databases, and these paper-based templates that they scan or type or upload. And similarly for the food business themselves, the restaurateurs, etc., they also use paperwork. So they have to keep records of fridge temperatures, delivery records, training records, which can be quite of a pain, an annoyance for them as well. So I guess there's kind of two sides to this market. And really what we're trying to do is to join those two sides together. So we have one software application we're creating for the inspectors from the councils to digitise that food hygiene inspection process to allow them to do it in real time digitally, and create the inspection report and do the score and all that fancy stuff for them and really just standardise it. But we're also building an application for the food businesses. So if you were to open a food business, some of the challenges when you open a food business is figuring out, the legal requirements, what you have to do to get this food hygiene score, what you're going to be inspected on. And then when you do get inspected, you quite often fall down and get scored down on some minor stuff or some quite substantial stuff. So rather than getting a score of 4 or 5, you might get a 3 or 4. And because you weren't aware or you didn't have the correct documentation or procedures in place. So what we're trying to do there is to provide, I guess it's a bit like providing answers to the test before you sit the test, to say to the food businesses, look, this is all the stuff that you need to do, to have in place, records, documentation, training, procedures. A lot of it is fundamental, around hygiene and cleaning, but a lot of it's more around management and documentation. So giving them this sort of checklist format, but also allow them to sort of self-assess and upload evidence and photographs to the application, which then could be submitted to the inspectors and verified. So we're kind of joining these two sides together.
Yeah. And do you remember when you maybe got the idea for that? Because it's quite specific. I've got a couple of friends that are in like the takeaway business, and they'll often get obviously the local authority come in. Obviously, I don't think they obviously let them know when they're going to come, and then they'll get a rating on their premises and food service. So yeah. Can you remember when you maybe got the idea, or was it in discussions with the university when you were doing this initial project?
Yes, I guess the original idea, the concept did derive from that consultancy project with the university. But as I say, it's evolved. Yeah. So I guess like any kind of business, it does move on and change and pivot and iterate. So it went from that original idea and concept of menus and ingredients allergens to kind of food hygiene. Now initially when we started back in 2020, we didn't have the focus on local authorities. The decision I made was let's focus on the food businesses, bigger market in terms of the problems, the numbers of food business, the diverse numbers of businesses within the market. So we thought, okay, let's focus on them first of all, and then create this kind of pre-inspection checklist based system for them, to tell them what to do, to say, look, this is all things you've got to do, the answers to that test before you sit the test. And you basically complete all these things, upload the evidence, and then basically this is what you're going to get, hopefully, as a 5. Very quickly became apparent that if a food business is starting out or they've had their inspection and score, then why do they need to continue to use the application? Because they've got the score, they know what they need to do, so why would they continue to use it and pay for it? So then I kind of went back to the drawing board and thought, actually, is there something else we can do on the food business side to move beyond that initial phase of pre-inspection readiness to the more day-to-day stuff? So once they've started the business, got their inspection, got the score, what happens after that? So they still need to keep records and maintain food safety, but it's more about the day-to-day management. So we're still working on that concept, but the focus for the last couple of years has been very much around the local authority and digitisation of the inspection, because there's very little competition. There are a few competitors on the food business market side that do kind of the food safety management, but there isn't anything really that connects the two markets together, and that's kind of our USP. What we're striving to do is to sit in between the councils, the inspectors for the councils, to digitise their working process and also support the food businesses. So we have this sharing of the inspection reports, uploading of evidence, so we have this kind of back and forth of information exchange between the two applications.
Yeah. And then before you set up Grape, was it on the back of you were doing B2B consultancy, and then did you sort of still have that running whilst you set up Grape, or did you sort of think, okay, I need to go like fully in on Grape and start this and I'm fully invested. And how was that initially in terms of getting the money together for that, getting obviously in the right mind frame? Can you take me back to like that moment when you were like, yes, I'm ready to kick this off?
So I mean, I guess I've always had a day job. My consultancy business was always a kind of a sideline hustle. It's never really been, sufficient enough to allow me to go full-time self-employed. But once I had the idea for kind of Grape Software in 2020, I did put the kind of consultancy business, Healthy Food Solutions it was called, on hold. And I've been winding that down over the last sort of 3 or 4 or 5 years, and that's now closed and dormant. So it's very difficult to juggle, a couple of businesses, around kind of a full-time job as well. So so the focus now is very much on building up Grape Software. In terms of funding, that has been quite challenging. And I think we've had a conversation about, how do you build a software business when you aren't a software developer yourself? You're a non-technical founder. And that has been probably my number one challenge, Kasim, since starting the business and having this idea and actually moving away from a service-based consultancy business where I have the expertise within my control to digitizing that and moving into a software business. That is quite a big leap of faith. And then you see the realization has been about actually, I no longer have the expertise to make this business a reality. How can I then develop in this business and make it reality, and what do I need to do to make that happen? So in the first year, I thought, actually, the obvious answer is I need developers. I need some software engineers. So I went away, jumped on LinkedIn, trying to find some software engineers and developers. Found out they come at quite a hefty price tag, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure you guys, listening to this will have their own kind of day rates and salaries. So then I thought, okay, how am I going to pay these guys? I need to raise some funding. So then I started to look at funding investment. And then I realised, after having a conversation with investors, that, having little more than an idea, trying to raise investment of, a PowerPoint essentially, a concept, it was very much about, come back when you've got something, some traction, some customers and some revenue. So that presented quite a significant challenge, is how do you get away from a concept to a business that's generating income and profit? How do you build that? So it's been quite a journey to resolve that problem, and I don't think I've fully solved it yet. But we're definitely further on from where we were in the beginning. We have had some funding, so we've been on a couple of accelerator programs. So we were very successful and grateful to be awarded Royal Academy of Engineering in 2024. So that came with a nice grant funding and a 6-month accelerator program. We also, on the back of that, won some Innovate UK funding as well. Before that, I was relying on kind of student interns and developers from some of the Northeast universities. So they came free, but obviously their skill set wasn't, high enough to, be professional level. So it was a question of, how do we check the quality of this? I was managing to bring somebody in part-time just to kind of look at overseeing those students and checking the code. And we managed to pull together an MVP, quite scrappy. The initial version targeting the food businesses, that was built on PHP. After the feedback, and then realising we were going to shift focus onto local authorities, we realised we needed to move from kind of a PHP stack to a .NET stack. There was a few reasons behind that, really. Security, integration with local authorities, and I guess kind of scalability as well. So I did have quite a lot of advice around that and a lot of research. And people that know more than me said, this needs to be rebuilt. So that was a decision 2023. The funding from Royal Academy in our UK then helped us take this kind of scrappy MVP that we built on like an NVC, so a very basic .NET stack, and then really build that into a scalable Blazor web application in .NET, which is kind of where we are today. That was a 6-month project, and all this while, Kasim, we've been working with users from both the local authority market and the food business market to say, hey, this is the idea, here's some screenshots, here's some mock-ups of what it's going to look like, how it's going to work, getting feedback, developed a focus group, of 20 or 30 now, I think it is now, from local authorities, and just really getting that continual feedback from them as the sector experts about their processes, their ways of working, what the software needs to do, and really getting their kind of thoughts and, shaping the development. So I'm pleased to see now, after building this out, bringing an agency in, getting the professionals to build it properly, we now have something that's good enough to be commercially viable. We've just gone through pen testing, so penetration testing, to make sure it's secure. We've got a few bugs and vulnerabilities we've had to resolve and look at, which is good. And we're now looking at Cyber Essentials to get that done. I've then brought in another senior developer, and I know you know him as well, so he's helping us out at the minute as well, which I'm really, really grateful for. And hopefully it's now about, actually, we've got something here, the feedback's really positive, let's bring it to market, let's get people using it, get some feedback, and then look at, can we scale this organically, generate some revenue, or do we then have enough traction to look at raising investment?
And when you were first looking to set up Grape, what was like sort of in your mind in terms of, so you've always had an interest in technology, did you know how to code? Did you learn how to code previously? Did you look into it again when you were looking to set up Grape, when you set up Grape? And at that time, did you think it was maybe something you may be able to do yourself? Or what was your thoughts around that at the time?
Yes, I guess there's a few stages to pick apart that question. So I guess if we go all the way back to when I was working in catering hospitality, back in the 90s, it was a definite no. Didn't know very little about kind of software engineering and coding. Did my degree in food science nutrition. Still this curiosity, interest in technology. And then I kind of started to get into building websites. Taught myself PHP, and I was able to kind of pull together front ends, CSS, HTML, start to do some stuff with WordPress, customization of WordPress sites, and then I was able to build my own very basic MVP on PHP and started to learn SQL and databases. And that was when we kind of realized that PHP wasn't really going to be viable between sort of 2020 and 2022, and then we made the decision to switch over to .NET. So I kind of spent the best part of 8 or 10 years teaching myself how to code, learning front end, learning some back end, and then basically we've had to switch stacks, which was quite a risk, quite a leap of faith, but obviously I was advised the reasons for that. And I'm now having to go back and learn .NET, C#. There's some really good tutorials on YouTube. I use Udemy, which is great. But I tend to focus on the front end. I think I'm actually quite a good self-taught front end developer. I've got a very good visual design mindset. I've taught myself Bootstrap, CSS, HTML, so I can pretty much do all the front end, and then some of the other guys do the back end, and we connect it together. So we kind of hop along quite nicely, yeah.
Oh, good stuff. Then I guess for the first 2 years you mentioned, was it just yourself working on developing the MVP using PHP? So it was just yourself, or did you have any support or any external help to help with that?
No, it's pretty much me. I did have a business partner in the very first year, but he moved on. So yeah, it was me on the technical side. And the business side, obviously, spinning all those plates, wearing all those hats as you do. One of the best advices I had in terms of building a business and trying to raise investment was you need some sort of an advisory board and advisory group, because you can't do it all yourself and you don't know it all yourself. And that was a really important lesson to learn. I was reading a lot of books, doing a lot of online self-development, because, like I say, I didn't know how to start and run a business. I simply didn't know technical abilities. I didn't know sales and marketing, business development. So I learned all of that. But when somebody said to me, if you can't afford to bring people in, have you thought about an advisory board? So that was a good idea, because I didn't really want to bring in formal kind of non-execs where you allocate them equity or you pay them day rates. So I was able to start researching and bringing in quite senior or people who either had run a business or been involved in businesses, and gradually, bit by bit, start to build up this advisory board. So there's 9 on there now, and basically it's an informal advisory board, very much hands-off. So they don't have an active hands-on role in the business. We have a monthly virtual call. And there's people on there that, are from technical. So I've got a kind of advisory CTO, sales and marketing, HR and finance, project management, and there's a few other disciplines as well. Difficult to get everybody on the call at the same time, as is ever, in meetings, but it's really, really helpful. As a single founder, it's very lonely and challenging. So it's helpful to have these experts who've been there and done it and help you to grow professionally and talk through these challenges and think strategically about the sense of direction, I guess.
And how did you go out to find this kind of support? Because obviously that sounds like that is exactly what you need. So there might be people in your, where you were right now thinking, okay, I've got this idea, or, I've already started the business, but maybe sales is my blocker or market is my blocker.
Yeah.
Where can I go out there to find somebody to help? And are you paying for this service as well, or is it something that they're all doing for free or as like mentorship?
So I've got one of them on a small equity stake, but the rest of them are just doing it in advisory capacity, which is great. We have had conversations about formalising that, but I think we've all agreed that it's early days.
Yeah.
Initially, how did I find them? Well, I had to kiss a few frogs, and it was literally hours and hours on LinkedIn, trying to find people who had expertise in the right kind of sectors and disciplines, seeing if they were interested. But yeah, I did find a few people who wanted, quite significant day rates or big chunks of equity. And then I was introduced to a group called the Experience Bank, which is a Northeast-based company that bring in sort of high-level advisors and experts and NEDs. And they purely work on a kind of philanthropic and voluntary basis. So they are looking to basically help companies, young companies, as I said, people have been there and done it. They are hands-off. So literally we have maybe 1 or 2 hours a month where we, jump on a call, talk through the challenges. We've got WhatsApp and email, obviously. Sometimes people can't make the calls, which is fine. They get recorded, they get shared. There's conversations in a WhatsApp group. So if people can't be there at the time, they can contribute after or during, depending on what's going on that month. So really, really valuable if you are, looking to start a company or you are a solo founder. Then I would strongly advise to look at, bringing in advisors, people who've got disciplines that you haven't. And yeah, check out the Experience Bank.
Yeah. And is there like an accountability piece to that as well? Do they give you targets, or do they say, let's try and achieve this? And then do you feel like maybe having somebody to be accountable to can help as well, or is there not that sort of element to it?
Definitely an accountability angle, absolutely, 100%. We've kind of got quite a good format agreed where we talk through, obviously, software, dev, technical stuff. Then we talk about, users, sign-ups. Then we talk about sales and marketing. And then there's kind of a funding, finance, investment. So there's kind of 3 or 4 topics, chapters, whatever you want to call them, that get covered. But it is predominantly about challenges, obstacles, how do we get developers when we can't afford to pay them? That's probably the number one challenge. User feedback is another one that comes up again. But yeah, it's strategic. It's about the bigger picture. Obviously, we've got business plan and financial forecasts, and they do hold me to account. So, when I say this month, we're going to try and get, 20 users signed up by, and then, that day comes, why haven't you got 20 users signed up? And these are the reasons why. So I guess it's good to have that accountability, and I guess the sense check, because if I say I'm going to get 20 users by September the 1st, and it's the 1st of August, they say, James, that's not going to happen. So, it is good to have that kind of sense of accountability, and I guess just, sense checking, what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So take us back to the period then when you got the advice that, you're going to have to switch technology stacks.
Mm-hmm.
How did you go about finding developers to do that? I appreciate you landed on getting some developers in from universities. How did that sort of idea come about? What was that sort of period like in Grape's journey at that point?
Yeah, so I guess when we formed the company, it was a lot of soul searching. How do you build a software company when you're a software developer? That's still very much the biggest blocker. I've always been interested in tech, but as I say, I'm not a developer myself. I've learned bits and pieces, but I definitely wouldn't call myself as a software developer. It was searching for freelancers, and then I kept realised that these freelancers obviously wanted day rates. People wouldn't work for nothing. Or there's a few people that said, actually, I'll help you out, but I want some equity. So people either didn't believe in the long-term vision and wanted a short-term pay, or they had some curiosity about the long-term vision and they wanted some equity, which I guess was risky, because you don't know these guys, you don't know their capabilities, their abilities, but also you don't know whether you're going to get on. So it's a bit like getting married. You wouldn't get married to somebody you just met straight away. There's a period of dating, so to speak. So it is difficult bringing people into the business. And I guess it was the introduction to the Experience Bank, a chap called Peter Neal who runs that was really, really helpful. He introduced me to who is my CTO, who was actually I've known from other circles already. And that CTO then advised, how to do it correctly, and, the whole PHP to .NET switch.
And the CTO, is he still in the business now? Are you
he is,
part of the company?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But again, he's hands-off. He's advisory, strategic. He's very well connected, but he is, purely advisory. So, he sits on the board meetings and the team chats, and, he basically advises from a technical perspective.
Yeah. And how many developers have you had, I guess, over the years, but like sort of at one time as well, that have been working on the product?
Yeah, so it peaks and troughs. So sometimes we might have one or two. I've got one or two quite high-level back-end developers that I'm really, really grateful and appreciative for, who are very knowledgeable. And then we have students. So I think you were asking about how do we get students, and how did I originally discover that opportunity? So I was actually contacted by a Northeast university. They contacted me and said, look, we're trying to place students and we have interns. Yeah. And then I thought, we're not really a big enough company to employ or take on apprentices. And then when I had a conversation with this university, it was actually, they can work remotely because we didn't have offices. Yes, we have registered offices, but we don't have an office space. And it was more about they can help you out, and they can work on challenges and help you build software or do things within the business and help you, bring that along. So I thought, yeah, let's try this. And I think the first cohort we had 4. I think one of them was quite good, but I think the other 2 or 3, their abilities were, not quite at the high enough level as we'd expect. So we had some challenges, they didn't quite, know how to do things correctly, which you've got to appreciate because they're students, they're still learning. So if you do use students, you do have to definitely bear that in mind. So I think it kind of took 1 or 2 cohorts to kind of realize this, to actually, yes, you can get students to come into the business and do internships and work experience, but making sure those students have got the minimum level of ability, that is really, really important. And I've developed quite a good process now. So we have like a shortlisting questionnaire which we send out. So we'll list, it's a bit like a job spec. I guess, as you're familiar with, you list, the minimum sort of skills that are required. Obviously, .NET, C#, Blazor now, and then on the front end, HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, things like, Git and SQL and database. So you list the criteria you want, obviously, and then you say, send me your CV, your LinkedIn profile, just to kind of filter them out. And then, ask them how confident they are on a scale of like 1 to 5. Obviously, the expectation is we're not expecting them to be a 5 out of 5 because they're students, but we do expect them to have some level of minimum ability. So as I was just saying to one of my colleagues, it's a bit like saying, do you speak French? And they speak, no, I don't speak French, but I speak Italian. Well, that's interesting, but that's not really helpful. So some of the students we've asked, do you know C# and Blazor and written .NET? Not really, but I've done Python. Right. Okay. Have you done C#? No, but I've done C, or I've done C++. So you've got to kind of judge them on their ability.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of calls this week shortlisting for the next September cohort. And you do have to give them a little bit of leeway. Some of them will have never had an experience. Some of them might be better on the front end or back end. I spoke to one this morning who came across as really, really positive. She had some good transferable skills. She had a basic level of C#.NET, but she was very strong on the front end. She had some data science, AI, machine learning, which I thought fascinating. But it was more about how she presented herself and what she said and how she said it that really kind of interested me. Versus, a couple of students that might not even have tuned up to the interview, never gave a reason, rescheduled at the last minute, or on the interview, they basically weren't able to give examples of, working with .NET or C#. And that can be quite frustrating because you've shortlisted them saying they've got basic experience in C#, and then on the interview, they said they haven't. So it's definitely got its challenges. You have to take that into account. So there's a shortlisting process. And then once we shortlisted them, we might give them a little task, something quite simple, just to test what they can do and what they can't do, and do they understand some basics. And then we'll either offer them the placement or not. The placements can vary anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months, anywhere from sort of 5 hours a week to 20 hours a week. Some of them are free. Some of them are partially subsidised, some of them fully subsidised. So different universities will have different kind of internships offers, but also different universities have different tech stacks. So Newcastle, for example, tends to be quite strong in PHP and Java, and we tend to use Sunderland and Teesside now because they seem to be strongest in .NET and in C#. So we've got quite a good relationship with them. But it's definitely, it's not ideal. I will definitely acknowledge that. But, we're an early stage startup, pre-revenue. We can't afford to pay, for good high-level developers. You have to kind of figure stuff out. And I guess as being an entrepreneur and a founder, you have to think outside the box, and you have to think about, how can I do things and how can I make things happen? And as I keep saying, most people that start a software business are software developers. I'm not. So, you have to kind of think outside the box. And, if I can get it to a point where we've got the software viable enough, and I think we're very, very close to having that now. It's been a long, arduous journey, but we're very close now. And hopefully if people start to use it, trial it, buy it, more confident now that that's going to happen, then, will it be sufficient to start generating some revenue organically? I'm hopeful. Or do we need to look at raising investments to get it to the next stage?
Yeah. Typically, how are they usually in between the second and third year, the students that come through, or do some of them, have they finished their degrees and then they're still looking for some experience? How do they typically come through?
Bit of both. Yeah. So again, different universities will have different offers, different programs. So Teesside tends to be second years. They have 2 intakes or 2 cohorts. So the autumn cohorts tend to be, I think it's the computer science bachelors, and then in the spring it tends to be the masters.
Right. Yeah.
The masters tend to be more on the data science side of things, which we're not quite there yet. I'm exploring that myself. Whereas the autumn intake tend to be very much the back end and the front end.
Yeah. How do you go about testing them at interview or with the tech test you mentioned as well? Is there any particular questions you ask to be able to gauge like what level they're at? Obviously, like you said, they're not going to be the finished article. They're obviously still students. They're looking for experience as well. But how can you, I guess, obviously even the internship space will be quite competitive for students where if they're going out to interview, what things would you ask for, and what tips would you give them as well with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm just reflecting on that myself. So the process we have that seems to work reasonably well is we have the shortlisting questionnaire. As I said, you list the basic skills, the front end stack, CSS, HTML, Bootstrap, or even just custom CSS. The back end, Blazor, .NET, C#, and you ask them on a scale of 1 to 5 how confident you are. Anything below a 3. I probably wouldn't shortlist them because it takes a lot of kind of upskilling and kind of managing. So generally the kind of 3s and 4s and 5s, it does tend to be all over the place. As you said, I wouldn't expect to have somebody as a student, being across the board as a 5. It has happened occasionally, which, you're delighted to have. They tend to be the ones that, I have to say, got a bit of a chip on the shoulder. They tend to be, I'm great, I can do this, I'm going to pick and choose who I work for, versus actually we want to offer you an internship. And I think the good ones know that, so they can choose who they want to work for because they know they're good. But more often than not, Kasim, it tends to be 3s and 4s. So that then tends to be, okay, you've got something, let's shortlist you, have a chat, pick apart, ask those direct questions. And it might just be, do you know C#, .NET? No, but I can do Python or C++. And then, have you done SQL? Have you done any framework? There's some transferable skills here. What can you do with SQL? Do you understand about databases? Have you used Git? Do you know what Git is? Can you do pushes, pulls, merge requests? I asked somebody this morning, do you know what a branch is? She didn't, but she's quite familiar with GitHub. So you've got to kind of, pick apart those questions. And then I guess after that, the decision is, do I feel that there's something there good enough that we can shortlist them and bring them in? Are they going to need a lot of managing? Or do they need to be given a little bit of a task just to assess that further? And that task could be, just design me a contact form or a UI or a mock-up, or here's a mock-up, design the back end, just something that's very, very basic, just so they understand. Some of the students we've had might have done MVC, so Model View Controller, but they don't know Blazor. And that's fine. That's quite easy to transfer that across. So it is very individual. I guess for tips for the students, I've literally been reflecting on that the last week. And I think what I'm going to do is produce some sort of a interview preparation guide. Basic things like if I send you an interview invite, accept it. If you don't accept it, are you going to turn up? If you get the invite, turn up for the bloody interview. If you don't turn up, what does that look like to a potential employer, So basic things like that. I know that sounds obvious, but we're talking about students here. And then once you attend the interview, listen to the questions. If we've asked you for things like Blazor, .NET, give me examples of what you've done previously. So one of the questions, they can upload a screenshot or they can send a link to the GitHub. If you haven't got a GitHub, create one, upload some projects. It's about showing me, not just tell me what you can do, but if you can show me some examples of what you have done previously, just to kind of give me that confidence in your ability. And yet, if you haven't done that before or you don't know that, have you done something similar or related that can be referenced? If you built a contact form, in Python, and we built a contact form in Blazor, you know how to build a contact form. So, it's stuff like that.
Yeah. Great. No, some really good tips there. So hopefully your students can use them to get ahead and get the placement and get the experience. I guess that's bringing the next cohort of software engineers into the market as well. In terms of, I guess, so then where you are, like modern day, where do you feel you are in terms of, you've got the MVP, have you already got some people that are using it, whether they're using it as a trial, whether they're paying for it? Have you got any paying customers at the moment? Where are you at with Grape at the moment?
Yeah, so we had kind of a scrappy MVP that we've kind of bootstrapped students. We won the funding last year, so Royal Academy in Innovate UK. That finished in March this year, 2025. Done the pen test till June, resolving those kind of pen test and vulnerabilities. We're going to go for Cyber Essentials towards the end of the year, and Cyber Essentials Plus. We have had users over the last year to 18 months, anywhere from viewing feedback in the focus group, looking at mock-ups, to actually having an account and trialing it very early on, with a disclaimer, obviously, that it's not fully functional. It's a beta product, so they completely understand that and get that, but they want to be the first to test it because there's nothing like this that exists. So they're very, very keen to test that and give feedback. Obviously, they're busy people, so that we don't want to bug them too much, but we want to make sure that actually what we've got does what they needed to do. That's really, really important to kind of bear that in mind as our kind of guiding post, I guess. So where we are now is we're really confident we've got something that's needed by the market, that's very, very user-friendly, that's usable, and solves a big problem that exists and isn't being solved elsewhere. We have a few things that need to be resolved. that the two back-end developers are helping me with. So they are quite important things. So, user licenses and user management. So yes, we've got a system that allows people to do an inspection and create a report and get a score, which is, the core kind of functionality. But if you think about moving that from an MVP to a commercial product, you need all this kind of peripheral stuff, secure login systems. So we've got Auth set up, licensing, blocking users, assigning users, user management. So we're busy working on all that. And then there's a couple of things that the inspectors have said actually doesn't do this yet. So we're busy working on that. So I'm very hopeful that we're going to do a relaunch in the autumn. I've commissioned a press release. It's going to go out in mid-September. Primarily to some of the local government and related kind of food safety organisations, just to talk about, I guess, my background and the journey similar to this, but also, who we are, what we do, what the product is, to raise awareness of that. We're still offering a 3-month beta trial for free. So that means users can sign up and test it for free for 3 months and give us feedback. And then we've discounted down the pricing. So probably towards Q3, Q4 the year, we'll relaunch in September, do the beta trial, and then start to move to more of a commercial revenue generation phase, and then look to see how that goes. So we've had probably 15 to 20 local authorities signed up to test it, giving us feedback. So there's 400 in the UK. So that's pretty good going for 18 months or so. And they've given us quite good, warm, positive feedback that actually this really does help them, make the inspections more efficient and solves the problems that they are working on. So it removes kind of all of the paperwork and the post-admin typing up and scanning, so it's done in real time. So it's now moving towards that position of actually how do we start to get people to not just trial this and use it, but actually start to pay for it. And what price points are going to be right.
Yeah, no, I think it's great you've got that many signed up already in terms of doing the beta for you, and I think that's like the market you're in. So I think with like Cyber Essentials as well as that, so then you can get onto these like government frameworks and then provide services, public services. Well, that's really interesting. Obviously, you've been on the journey like 5 years now, and do you feel like that the time that it's took is probably the right amount of time, or do you feel like if you could go back, I think naturally everyone could probably think they maybe will get there quicker or whatnot, but do you think that producing something like this can take that much time, and for people not to get disheartened if they feel like the idea they've got isn't coming off the ground after a year, after 2 years?
Yeah, so I guess there's some big questions in there, Kasim, and some really important lessons to learn. I suppose the first thing I would say is build it and they will come. It's not true. You have to test the idea. So I learned that very early on. Assumptions is a big mistake. So yes, you can use your personal experience and insights, which I've got a lot of. And if you feel you've got an idea, by all means start to kind of build it and bring it to life. But I would not take it all the way to a fully finished solution without any conversations with the end users. That's really, really important. I would totally advise people to do that. And that might sound really, really obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people do start a business and build something, and then they get to the end point, they've built it, and they might have raised some funding, some investment, and actually they realise, based on the user feedback at that end, this actually isn't what users want, and it doesn't work in the way that users need. So the earlier you can talk to your users, the more engaged they will be, and they will start to become advocates because they feel valued and listened to, and they'll start to buy into your journey. So it's a win-win for you and a win-win for them. That's been quite important. And then what was the second half of your question?
So it's sort of maybe to do with with the lessons you've learned. People might think, you're at that stage now where you still obviously haven't fully released a product, but it's coming up 5 years.
Is it worth it?
As if would you say people may get disheartened after year 2, year 3? I mean, were you at any point disheartened with where you were in terms of you've had to change your tech stack, you've had to you're not able to afford to bring in
pros,
but also I was going to move on to maybe asking about the accelerator programs and the funding as well. But obviously I guess maybe we can explore that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about maybe like the disheartening part. Like, did you ever feel disheartened? Did you ever feel like, you know, you maybe bit off more than you can chew? Like, how did you feel with that? And also with the patience, obviously you've been building it for over 5 years now. How and again, there may be 2 or 3 questions within that, but you know, how would you describe that?
And I guess the idea goes back even further to that, you know, looking at kind of the consultancy and you know, what was the original concept, and then that's moved on even before I started the company. So it has been a long journey. At times it's been tough, really tough. But yeah, I think the biggest challenge is, you know, as I keep saying, you know, how do you build a software company, you know, software developer? I think in hindsight, it would have been a damn sight easier if I was a software developer or I had a software developer, you know, a technical partner to come into the business. That would have definitely helped. But I may have had to raise investment a lot earlier or give away quite a substantial piece of equity. And I'm not closed to giving away equity by any shape of imagination. But it is about, you know, finding the right person who believes in that longer journey, who just doesn't want a quick pay, that's prepared to, you know, put in that longer term vision into the company. Yeah, it has been tough. There's been some long days and, you know, long weekends. I do have to make a lot of sacrifices personally. You know, social life, hobbies, don't get a lot of time to do all that. You know, working mornings, evenings, weekends, you know, you have to put the graft in. But yeah, ultimately, I do believe in my heart that, you know, we're building something here, and I do still believe in that long-term vision, I guess because of what I'm being told from the user feedback. I guess if it was, we don't want this, we don't need this, no, I'm not interested in it. I think what's really reassuring is when we first started in 2020, just before COVID or just during COVID, a lot of authorities were quite closed to what we were doing. They were very much about, this is the way we do it, this is the way we're all going to do it, and we're not really interested in software. Fast forward sort of 3, 4, 5 years, I think with obviously the budget constraints in the public sector, local authority budgets, staffing, people retiring, they're actually looking for cheaper ways of doing things, more efficiencies, cost savings, how can they do more with less? And they're much more open now to technology, and they've realised the benefits. You know, I'm talking to them now, and they're starting to use ChatGPT. They're starting to build Microsoft Forms. They're using other sort of applications. So they're starting to kind of realise there's other ways of doing what they need to do. But I think what we're doing is building an end-to-end solution. It's not just about form, which, yes, that's what we're talking about. It's taking that manual process and making it into a digital form. That's at the core of what we do. But there's a load of other stuff, you know, calculating the hygiene score, generating the PDF report, collaborating with the users. We've made it quite clever, and during the RUK project last year, so we plugged in all of the food hygiene legislation. So when they're doing an inspection, these guys are obviously experts at food safety, and there's a load of legislation they have to reference and know about. So we've plugged all those legislation frameworks into the database, and we've broken it down by criteria. So that was one of the core kind of things that we did as output for the RUK project. So we've allowed them to build their own templates, reference legislation, add questions, connect those to the legislation from the legal frameworks, and then say, for example, if the restaurant, you know, doesn't have hot water in the sink, they might have to have hot water. And this is under legislation, you know, Food Safety Act 1990, 19.2, and then they would give them an action phrase, say, you need to have hot water. So we've generated all these little things like standardized phrases that removes all of the handwritten typing up. So all these little kind of savings and little kind of features that we've brought in for them to make it even quicker and even faster.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I think it certainly does. I think, like, you know, because you've got that feedback in terms of, okay, actually there is a need for this, that's probably what's kept you going as well. Whereas I guess at the start, like you said, one of your advice is to just try and get that feedback as quickly as possible, because I'm sure if you were kept getting, I don't think there's a need for this, you know, you'd probably would have moved on to something else. You wouldn't have been stubborn to be like, no, this is going to work. What was it like in terms of, did you have to take any bigger risks when you set the business up, when you were going into Grape, like in terms of like, yeah, this is what I wanted to do? You know, financially, did you have to take any risks? Did you take any investments then? And how did you then get involved with accelerator programs and funding? And what was the challenges with that? And, you know, because I appreciate they can be quite competitive as well, and you've got to get a really good you got to present like a good idea to these people.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few points there. I guess in terms of the financial, early on, the costs were quite low, or nothing really other than setting the company up. But I guess as we've grown and started to kind of put things into place, the costs have grown and escalated. So the biggest cost at the minute is like our DevOps infrastructure. So I think we're currently burning about 250, 300 quid a month, which is growing. And that's dependent on, the the API hits and the students and the users and how much we're using all of the software. And then we use other things like, different kind of software, the Google, ChatGPT, the costs have mounted up. So I guess keeping the business going for 5 years has probably been the biggest risk. And I've probably put in quite a lot of my own money to kind of keep that going. As well as the grant funding we've had. So, roughly speaking, you're probably looking at between sort of 50 to 80k to kind of keep the business going for 5 years. And that sounds quite a lot of money. But when you think about the potential for the business, and I think there are a lot of things that I want to do other than just food hygiene inspections. So going back to the original idea around menus and allergens, I think there's something there to still build once we're big enough. But there's also a whole bigger opportunity around internationalization. So we've only really talked about the UK and the market within the UK and how that works. But from the research we've done over the last 3, 4, 5 years, the story and the problem is very much the same around the world, except for China. China are very, very far ahead. They're very digital, as you'd expect. The rest of the world tend to do it very, very similar in terms of paper-based hygiene inspections. France, for example, have smiley faces or unsmiley faces, but America, they all use paperwork and handwritten, so many specs. So massive opportunity there to digitize internationally. That obviously a couple of challenges around that in terms of the language barriers, and also the legislation does vary outside of the EU, but it's not insurmountable. I think there's a big opportunity there. So I guess it's this risk versus opportunity. You've got to kind of take that leap of faith if you really do believe in the idea, and if you're getting the feedback and users are, I guess, buying into that, and the signals are right, then that does keep you going. And then I think it is about actually where can we take this from being that inspection, that UK-based software, to being something bigger and better. And what does that look like, and what are the numbers around that? And I did some work with Newcastle University in the business plan through the Arrow project, looking at the financial forecasts, the business clinic at Northumbria, they're a really good resource to tap into as well. So you got students working with you for 3 months, usually business and marketing, really, really good resource to tap into. But yeah, it has been tough. It really has. And there's been times, and I thought, well, I'm going to give myself till this date, and then that's it, I've had enough. And that was Christmas just gone. But I think this last 12 months, I think there's been a massive shift. We've won 2 grant fundings, which has been fantastic. And not only that has given us a cash injection, Kasim, but it's given us credibility. When people know we've been on the Royal Academy and we've had Innovate UK funding, that gives you a little bit of credibility, and that allows you to leverage other networks. And I'm now getting inquiries coming in from investors rather than me reaching out and chasing investors, which is great. We've already had 2 acquisition inquiries as well, and we are still pre-revenue, which has been great. I'm not adverse to selling, but the time has got to be right.
Yeah.
And obviously, letting the investors know we're not going to say no, but the time's not right. We're still pre-revenue, but let's have a chat. Let's get to know each other, build a relationship, get a bit more traction, get some commercial revenue. A year or 2 down the line, who knows? Yeah.
No, it's great. I mean, I think it's great now where you can almost see it where it's been over 5 years, but now you're at a position where people are inquiring to you about funding and investing rather than the other way around. Because I'm sure that was challenging in itself when you go for funding, when you go to accelerators, they're not just going to take everybody on. You have to have an idea, you have to pitch, you have to present.
Yeah.
So how was that as well? Was there a lot of work with that? Did you have any setbacks? Did you have any no's at that point with different accelerators or different grants and fundings as well?
Yeah. So it was the second time round for the Royal Academy. The first time it was a no. We also applied for Innovate UK Smart Grant in 2022, I think it was. That is a very competitive fund. I think it's on hold at the moment. They do give out up to $500,000 or more, I believe. It's very, very competitive and very tough to demonstrate you've got something unique and something scalable. But the second time round for the Royal Academy was great. I got to know the program manager and had a conversation about who we are and what we're doing, and what the requirements of the application were. And I did use ChatGPT a little bit, but a lot of the application was written by myself and refined by AI to kind of help it more professional, more readable. But I think it was what they said. I was able to demonstrate the uniqueness and the potential of the idea that I think they really saw. Because there isn't anything that we're doing. Yes, there are form builders. Yes, there are kind of risk assessment tools, but there's nothing around the food safety space and the local authority space that does what we are doing. And then on the back of the kind of Royal Academy, I was able to use some of the funding from that to commission a bid writer to help us apply for the Innovate UK fund to do that much better. And that really strengthened the application, helped us win that successfully. And that really made a difference because I was able to pay some debts off from the Royal Academy. That was a personal, no strings attached grant. The bid writer helped us win the RUK fund. That allowed us to bring an agency in. So I guess, the lessons there are, I think about it, kind of steps on the ladder. You can't get to the top of the ladder in one go. Can you break those steps down into more milestones, more achievable steps to kind of, think about, one step at a time?
Yeah. No, brilliant. I think it's great, and one big thing that I'm taking away from this is if you're a non-technical founder, you did a lot of stuff where you went on LinkedIn, you reached out to people, you identified there was gaps, whether that's with sales, marketing. You've never built a software company before, and I think that's one key takeaway that I'm going to take away definitely is reaching out to people that can help you get to where you can get to, and obviously you're a great example of that now, where you've got people that are on like an advisory, they're CTOs, they've been there, they've done it, and they can then show you how to do it, and hopefully they've got a lot of lessons that can help speed things up for you as well. And I think the other thing is obviously perseverance, getting feedback very, very quickly on the product. And obviously it can take, even obviously you're still 5 years in and you haven't got a fully, the product fully out just yet.
Yeah.
So
but we're on the right road now.
You're on the right road, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, James, brilliant. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thanks for coming along, and obviously wish you all the best in the journey. I'm sure Grape will go on to do some great things.
Thanks so much, Kasim. It's been a pleasure.